Hello friends, welcome back to this brand new video whereby we are going to discuss the useRef hook. In the previous video we discussed about the useMemo and useCallback hooks, whereby we learned that the useMemo hook returns a memoized result after an expensive computation, and we also discussed that the useCallback hook returns a memoized function, especially when passing a function as a prop from the mother component to the child component. We discussed that it's a good idea to wrap it in a useCallback hook to be able to return a memoized callback that can possibly be passed to a child component safely without worrying about re-renders. And this is because by default in React, when the mother component re-renders, all the child components to re-render regardless of what caused the mother component to re-render. So basically, by passing a function to a useCallback hook before passing it as a prop to the child component, we would be trying to reduce the number of re-renders for the child component, such that even if the mother re-renders, for as long as what we passed in the dependency array is not affected, we can still have our child component without re-rendering according to the mother. And in this video we are going to be discussing about the useRef hook. useRef is basically a way to create mutable references and can be able to access and interact with the DOM directly. Let's first take an example of a useRef. Of course, we are going to start with the basic syntax. Like we've been saying, we start by calling the ref. We start by calling the hook. And importing it from React. Let's try to hover here. As you can see, the useRef hook returns a mutable ref object whose current property is initialized to the passed argument, that is the initial value, and the returned object will persist for the lifetime of the component. Something very nice. And here they are saying that the useRef is useful for more than just the ref attribute, and it's handy for keeping any mutable values around, similar to how you would use instance fields in classes. Let's first come here and first assign it a variable. We are going to say const test_ref, and it's going to be useRef. Inside here we can pass the initial value, but of course it's optional. So when you pass it, like they said, it's what is initialized to the current property of the mutable ref object. So let's proceed here. This was just the basic syntax. We can come down here and discuss the various scenarios where we are going to meet the useRef. There are quite many, but in this tutorial we are going to be discussing about two most common scenarios where a useRef hook is applicable. But there are really many because we are going to be learning more as we work on projects. We are going to be exploring more and more, but for now we are going to explore only two, but trust me, they are the most commonly used. And number one is going to be accessing the DOM, of course, like we had said. And after that, we are also going to learn about using a useRef hook to preserve values between renders. Like that. Okay, there is a typo here. Like that. So we can start with accessing the DOM elements. Let's first initialize our useRef hook. We are going to say const. Let's call it input ref because we are going to be applying it on an input element. and it's gonna be useRef like that. So as you can see, we already have our input in here, so we are gonna come here and pass some attribute that gets to connect it to our reference. So we are gonna say ref, it's gonna be input ref. At the moment, we can come down here and try to console log our input ref, and we are gonna log it only once. So we are gonna write our use effect like this, and we are gonna pass an empty dependency array such that it can run only once. By the way, if you didn't watch my use effect video, I highly recommend you watch it first, and I will be putting the link in the description such that it can be easily accessible. Okay, let's proceed here and console log the input ref like that. Let's come here and right click, inspect, and of course we are interested in the console. Let's refresh. There is here an object called current. There is an object with current property, just like they told us here. Let's expand it. As you can see, there are very many other properties inside the current object, quite many. So you realize the useRef hook has very many applications, like quite many. So let's come here and close here. In our example, we are going to be exploring how to focus in an input after a page reload. It is something very good because at times you reload something like a login page and you need to focus on the first input of that login or the first input of a register page. So it is something very nice to know. So to do that, the first step was to connect our reference to the DOM element because we've realized it has access to DOM elements. So we've just done that. And now the second step is to look for the appropriate method on the current object that gets to do for us what we need. And in our case, it's called the focus method. So we are going to say input ref dot current. We realize that current is the object on this ref, and we also need the focus method on the current object. So let's try to come here and refresh. As you can see, the cursor is here. We are able to focus the input on page reload or when the page just loads. So that was one of the examples of using a useRef hook to access DOM elements. It just does more than that. You remember when we came here, we found out that the useRef hook is very powerful and is even more than the ref attribute that we just passed here to be able to access this. Of course, this is the most common use case, but there are very many other ones. So we are going to be discussing only two for now, but the two we are going to discuss are the most common. In here, we have very many other cases where it can be helpful by the fact that we are able to access this element. We can also keep track of what is being typed such that we can use it in the place of a use state to be able to track whatever is typed in this input, plus many more other ones. We are going to be looking at most of these scenarios when we get to writing a real-world project. Of course, after this tutorial, they are going to be a very nice project. And if you don't know what we are going to build, I highly recommend you watch the use state video. It includes the introduction. And by the way, if you don't know what we are going to build, I highly recommend you watch the introduction video, whereby we learned how to pass props from one component to the other. Plus, we also learned the basics of React. And at the start, we discussed about the specific project we are going to build and how it's going to help us improve our skills in React.js. So let's proceed for now. By the way, if you didn't watch it, I will also put the link in the description so that you can easily access it. Let's proceed and look at another way of using a useRef hook to preserve values between re-renders. Is something very nice also, because at times when you're not using a useRef hook, you would need various use effect hooks to perform something small which could have been handled in only one single line or 2 or 3 lines of code using useRef hook. We are going to see this application in very many areas when doing real world projects, but for now we need to get the concept very well. Let's assume an example of a counter just like we had. We are going to start with our state variable count, and it's set a function set count, and we are going to initialize it use state. We are going to initialize it to 0, and let's also have our ref. We are going to call it count ref, and it's going to be use ref, and we are going to initialize it to 0 as well. Remember, we agreed that the initial value passed a ref attribute is what is set as the current property on the useRef mutable ref object. So we need to keep that in mind as well. So we can basically have a button and can just say increment count like that. Then inside here we need something like on click. You can just say handle click or handle increment like that. Then inside here we also need to display this count. Count is count like that. Then now we finally need the function called handle increment. We can declare it here. It's gonna be an arrow function, and inside here when using a use state hook, we actually discussed that we could just come here and update our count and set it to count plus 1 to be able, for example, to increment our count by 1. But of course there is a problem, or we could pass here like previous count and increment count with previous count plus 1, especially for asynchronous operations. We discussed that. So here there is one problem. If this count changes, it's gonna cause the component to re-render. Remember, when it changes, the component renders, but when the component renders, the count is gonna cause the component to re-render, and this is because to prevent that you would need a use effect hook to be able to tell how you actually need the component to render and then what to cause it to re-render. You would pass here something like count such that the component only re-renders and this effect only runs when the count has changed. But in many scenarios, in many real-world scenarios, you are going to find if you're to use a use effect, you are going to have very many use effects for just something small that could be handled in a very small piece of code using a useRef hook. Okay, let's delete here and come here to update our state variable. Before we update, we are going to check on the current. And we are going to update it by incrementing it by 1. Let's just say plus equals 1. It's like a shorthand. Instead of saying current ref.current, it's current ref.current plus 1. They actually make the same. So we can come here and set count to count ref.current like that. By doing this, we are trying to minimize, not actually to minimize, to persist this count value to be able to control the component such that as the component renders, the count does not cause it to re-render. Let's come here and increment. As you can see, we are able to increment this count successfully. And as we increment, remember we are just calling the function when we click the button, but every time we click the button, we would be causing the component to render this new count value. Using a useRef hook, we are able to persist this value such that we can never cause a component to re-render. And this is something very necessary and very good to know, because it's gonna save us from writing very many use effect hooks for handling one thing, just to be able to control the re-renders of everything. Okay, it's something somehow confusing, but it's something necessary. If you didn't get it well, I highly recommend you watch it again. But it's something good to know. We are going to understand more when we write a real world project. And that was all with a use effect hook. Of course, it has very many use cases, quite many, but when you get these two very well, we are going to be discussing more in a real world project, or in real world projects we are going to make in some time to come. And if you like this video and would like to see more tutorials like this, please consider subscribing to the channel and hit the bell icon. And I really want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video.